thank you, Felice, and thanks everybody for being here. We have a few quick housekeeping items, some thank yous that we would like to say to people. First of all, dearest thanks go to Pauline and Renate for working together with us to do such an incredible exhibition. We're so pleased with how everything has happened. Of course, my guest curator on this project, Alhena Katsof, who has done an amazing job of ushering lots of work that happened with lots of other participants in advance of the exhibition that you see here. We also would like to thank the performers who you'll see in the video Telepathic Improvisation. They are Marwa Arsanios, Werner Hirsch, MPA, and Ginger Brooks Takahashi, as well as the camera and sound design work that Rashad Becker and Bernadette Passin did for the video. I also would be remiss if I did not mention Mason Leveryap, who, along with Alhena, initiated this year-long project of exhibitions and a residency in New York. Leah Gangitano at Participant in New York, where another installation version of this exhibition appeared. Victoria Brooks, who is instrumental in providing a space where the performance actually happened and was filmed at the MPAC Curtis R. Preem Experimental Media and Performing Arts Center at RPI in Troy, New York. Wenzel Bilger and the Goethe Institute in New York, who provided funding, as well as Pro Helvetia and the Canton de Vaud. We also will have a really incredible catalog that will be coming out in the coming weeks with all of the an essay that we've commissioned by Andre Lepecki, who is in the Department of Performance Studies at NYU. And I'd also like to thank Bill Arning and Mark McCrae, Carrie Inman, and Marley Lott for helping us out, as well as the CAM staff, who always throw down and do a really fantastic job. In particular, Patricia Restrepo, Amanda Thomas, Ronald Jones, and Jeff Shore on this project. So, thank you for sitting through all of that. I think I'll start actually by talking a little bit. One of the things that's really special for us about this project is a very deep Houston connection, and that is a connection to Pauline Oliveros, the composer who was born here in Houston and who's certainly one of the inspirations for the video. Her work, Telepathic Improvisation, which we share the title of, is a score that she produced in 1974 that became a way for Pauline and Renate to reimagine how that score, which was originally for audiences and musical performers, to be reinterpreted to include not only live performers, human beings, but also some machines on stage as well. And I wonder maybe if you might talk a little bit about what drew you to telepathic improvisations in particular. And maybe we can also, after we talk about that, talk a little bit about the work, because you've certainly also done other work that thinks about Pauline Oliveros and uses scores that she's produced. Who wants to go?
So, what interested us the most in this score was that the score asks the audience to send telepathic messages to the performers, and we thought it was a very beautiful and very interesting way to think about the relationship between audience and performance. And I guess one of the ideas of this score was to break the boundary between performer and audience, because it's not clear anymore who is actually producing the ideas for the performance. And we thought it was a very interesting and beautiful way to address this kind of communication that is always happening in any kind of performance, be it artistic or musical performance, this kind of exchange of energy and desire that is happening between the performers and the audience, and the expectations that are on both sides. And do you want to continue?
I just want to say something maybe about Pauline Oliveros, because I'm not sure if you're all familiar with her and her work. For us, she's really important because she just passed away last year, which is sad, but was 84. And she was one of the first female composers working with electronic music as early as in the 40s, I think, and 50s. And she did really interesting and inspiring pieces. So we were already for a while familiar with her work. And then what we did with this score was that she wrote something for music and musicians. So in her score, she asked a musician to step in front of the audience, and then the audience is asked to send a music telepathically to the musician. The musician should get the telepathic message and then start to play or sing that kind of music, and then the audience is asked to raise their hands as soon as that piece of music comes back to them, and they listen to what they just had sent to the musician. And we found that very beautiful. And then we tried to translate that into performance and into film. So first step was into performance, that we thought, okay, what would happen if all the performers and objects on stage are included in that message? So we can send messages to the lights, to the props, and also to the performers to do things on stage. And then we were thinking about film, because usually film is seen as a finished product. So you think you can't change anything. And what happens if you bring up that idea that the visitor in front of the screen can project their ideas on the screen, and then they will appear back to them, or they will appear in front of their eyes.
And there's one part that is really nice about the performance, about the score as well, is that it is for an audience that is very close or millions of miles away, and it could be light years. And also it could be interstellar communication. So it's not very clear actually who is really sending the messages, but yeah, so maybe some people have already seen their wishes happen on the film.
So that idea too of, I think what's interesting, maybe one of the things that you've talked about in the past is this idea of temporal drag. That something might happen in the past, it might happen in the future. And I think one of the things that feels really important for me about the video is this idea of kind of trying to receive information, trying to take what ideas might be floating around in the air, particularly given the kind of political situations, social situations, other situations that we find ourselves in at this moment. And I think those produce a lot of really intense emotion for people, and are oftentimes things that are maybe unspoken about. And I think one of the things that really moves me about the video is also this moment of kind of imagining what kind of future do you want to see. And I think that the video is a really great way to kind of initiate that thinking about a possible future. And certainly that kind of the situation, the monologue that you hear in the second part of the video, maybe you can talk a little bit about that monologue and that source material.
Maybe before we get into the monologue, I just want to add to what you just said, that thinking about the future might also include not only center your vision on the humans, but also on the objects, and to have some kind of mutual respect in between the environment, the objects, the non-human agents in that film, and the human performers that you see.
And that was very much at the core of our work, that we wanted to think about these hierarchies and think about the relationship between the performers and the different other agents on the stage in a different way. So we see, for example, these automatic stages moving, and sometimes it's not the performers who are moving the objects, but it's the objects who are moving the performers. Yeah, so when we started working on that project last year, that's a totally different context, but we were thinking a lot also from our context in Europe about the political situation somehow. And because last year there were all these votations also in Europe, and more countries were maybe going to vote again for right-wing politicians, and it was even before the elections here. So we were thinking, what is the situation where we are now, and how can we think about that in a historical way as well? And what kind of intervention or small intervention is possible with our art practice? And so we got interested to go back into the history of Germany, and we're reading again text by Ulrike Meinhof, who was this really interesting journalist, who was very important journalist in the end of the 50s, 60s in Germany, and very famous and respectable. And at some point she decided to, after the beginning of the left-wing movement in Germany, she decided to join the Red Army fraction. So she's very famous mostly for that, for being a member of the Red Army fraction and being arrested, and she died in prison in 1978. And we went back to one of her texts that really interested us, and that tries to reflect the moment in Germany where people really started to have a very strong opposition to the right-wing government in 1968. And the text is called From Protest to Resistance. And we were thinking in different ways, how could we reactivate that text, and how much has that text to do with today, and what are the differences with today as well, because there are a lot of differences. And you were talking before of temporal drag, so our idea was not really that the performer MPA, who is reciting this text at some point in the video, would pretend to be Ulrike Meinhof somehow, or talk as if she was Ulrike Meinhof. But we were really interested to have MPA making this connection to Ulrike Meinhof.
Or of having the text being there and finding that body of MPA, a queer performer of today, giving that speech again. And then there's also another link, because this little sentence where she speaks about protest and resistance, she quotes from a speech of Fred Hampton, who was part of Black Panthers, which he held in Berlin at the time. So it was also a quotation that went into her text and then went into the film. So we like to work with those relations, and they're there already, but to make them visible, to make them alive again, and to bring them up in a new way again.
One last thing. So when you were asking about temporal drag, what we like to say is that we are interested in some kind of drag that is not only about reflecting gender, but also about bringing together different temporalities, not in a way that we look at time in a very linear way, but to have these different moments coming together and see what's happening.
I do. Perfect timing. We had a telepathic moment. So we spoke a little bit already about the relationships between humans, right? And then Renate brought up the idea of the relationships between humans and objects, or maybe even the proposal that objects could have relationships to each other. And now we've introduced the idea of the text as well, right, and the performer. So MPA is performing, she's not theatrically performing as Ulrike Meinhof, but she, in a sense, is having a relationship or a kind of exchange with the text, which is being read through her. And so what I'm interested to think about is how all of these different forms of agents or agencies exist within a practice that is already so collaborative, right? Because you collaborate with each other, but you're also collaborating with the performers who are invited to bring their own ideas, I think, and I'd love to hear you speak a bit about that. Their ideas, their sensibilities, their, let's say, their field of relationships, which are not only to each other as performers, but also to the objects and to, in a sense, the experience of filming and to the texts that are being discussed and read. So how do these different kinds of agencies begin to be part of a collaborative practice, and how can we maybe even also think about agency, agents, and collaboration as a kind of protest or resistance, right? Because the notion of resistance, in a sense, is a verb as well.
I take that one. It's more easy. I think what I like is that there seems to be a strange tension between that, in a way, the film treats the performers in a similar way as it treats the objects. So they get messages and then they perform. But on the other hand, we have chosen the performers, or very specific performers that are very important to us and with whom we worked for a long time already and made other films together. And I think you have to say that, but I think it maybe appears in the film like that you have that tension and that it's present. We don't, or we usually work with friends or with people whose practice we admire and know, and their practice also in a maybe indirect way flows into the film. Either that we do also for this film, we did a little bit of improvisation also to find the things that made it into the film in the end, but also on the way of shared knowledge, of discussion that we might have, or what Pauline and I have in mind about their specific works that we like and that come back to us. And I think for each of the persons or the performers in the film, we had in mind something that we really like about their specific works, and which had to do with what we wanted to do with this project. So, for instance, MPA, she did performances herself, where she used a very aggressive manner to address questions of violent past and presence. And so we like to think of that aggression in relation to what we were planning, as an example. Want to continue with something? Thank you.
No? Well, I'm going to press maybe a little bit, because I'm curious to know if there is a way where, is there a way where for you is the decision to work in a collaborative way? Does it help you explore the notion of resistance and protest in your ideas, in your work, or do you see them? How do you see if there's maybe a relationship between the notion of collaboration and agency? Or is there?
Does it? Yeah, you have. Right.
Getting confused with that. That's collaboration, you know. Sometimes gets confusing. I think what I especially like about it is not the myth of that it's about friendship and you're also close and things like that, but that there are relations anyway. they are there. We read books, we speak to people, we watch films. So we always connect to things that are already there, that people have thought of, that people have created, and usually you tend to not making that visible, because then in the end it has the artist's name and so on. So maybe some path that we try to go with our work, try to make that visible and try to play that relations, and even maybe bring it into the exhibition space, because I think what we try to do with the in the exhibition space and with the way we organize things, that we try to include visitors into it, that they that if you enter the space, you might feel as becoming part of the installation, becoming, having an entrance or having an appearance like a performer might have when you peek around the box and people that watch the film see you entering the space, for instance. So we work on that relations. That's our interest, I think.
And when you were talking about these relationships and these different things that we encounter and bring together, sometimes in a very associative way or intuitive way somehow, I was just thinking about Pauline Oliveros and Ulrike Meinhof together, and I don't know we don't know what Pauline Oliveros would have said somehow, but it makes me think of this other work that we did 3-4 years ago, also with a starting point of a score by Pauline Oliveros, and the title we like the title so much. The title is To Valerie Solanas and Marilyn Monroe, in recognition of their desperation. So I was just thinking if we add Ulrike Meinhof in recognition of their desperation somehow.
Mm-hmm. So maybe as an extension of this thing, in terms of talking about the theatrics, I think that the kind of sense of the way that the exhibition has differed, both from its installation initially at Participant and here, they feel very different. At Participant, you had a kind of much longer space with a much higher ceiling, and you really kind of moved through in a very linear way, where here I think you can kind of circulate around the work, and I think it gives the work a bit more of a sense of animation somehow. I think the wig curtain kind of seems like it's wiggling up to the front to kind of try and get some attention. And maybe I wonder if we might talk a little bit about the sculptures also that you've produced, and their relationship to the space and to the ideas that you're talking about in the video, or if there are direct relationships like that.
So one of the things that really interests us in the film performance that we do is to think about the stage and what is on the stage, and when is the performance starting and what is off stage, the same way that we think about the frame, filming the performance, what is in the frame and what is off frame. And we noticed that installing the work in a space, we started to think about the same questions in the space. So, for example, here and with the different sculptures that are now exhibited in the exhibition, that we kind of think of the whole space of a kind of a stage somehow, or a situation where the audience and the visitors are kind of interacting first with the film, but also with maybe with the other objects that are there. And we are really interested to have this kind of elements in the space that don't have a specific quality, that where their position in the space and the relationship with the audience kind of is in the border of, is it a sculpture or is it maybe a prop for the film or is it a prop for the performance? And that's kind of the way we were thinking about these objects somehow.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've certainly kind of thought about, and which we've all talked a little bit about, is this idea of kind of front stage and backstage, and how I think the exhibition itself sets up a little bit of a tension. Are you seeing these things backstage before they're in their eventual ideal position on stage for performing, or are you kind of encountering them when they're waiting to be activated, which I think is a really special feeling to be able to develop within the exhibition.